right, so I got the questions.
Okay, we got our opening segment.
Oh, right now.
I'm sitting here reading the
Okay.
nonprofit accounting.
There you go. Okay.
And you're gonna walk in?
Well, I think this we can just start out. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
I
no,
think
you
it's-
walk in and
Yeah.
I say, hey Aaron, I'm just reading nonprofit
That's too scripted, though. I think right now, like how you're doing it right now, I think this is good. I think it's good. Okay, so Amanda, our director, actually pointed out some things to me in introducing getting this series started. And one of the things that we bring to the table is the fact that we are both veterans of being on boards.
Okay.
So we can give a little bit of our experience and our background on what did we take away, what did we feel our roles were, and how well do we feel our boards performed, and what do we feel that was lacking.
You gotta start with that. You gotta start with the purpose of the boot camp.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Well, I guess I have to go into the stats, because that makes it important. So one of the things that we were able to do was we went on, the National Nonprofit Quarterly site. We also went on the Urban Institute site, which is a national repository of nonprofit stats and data. And what we found was that from decade to decade, there's been a drastic shift in the makeup and the behavior of nonprofits around the globe, and specifically in the USA. One of the things that we found was between the years 2000 and roughly 2009, that we had 1.4 million registered nonprofits. In that same time, we found that of those, 344,000 approximately lost their exemption status. And when you fast forward a decade after, between 2010 and 2020, you had a new number, 1.5 million registered nonprofits. But of that number, the ones that lost their exemption status was around 760,000. So that right there is a very significant realization of, are we performing as overseers, as board members on these nonprofits appropriately? Are we effective? Because if all of these nonprofits are losing their exemption status, that means that we're not doing something right. Something's going wrong. Something's broken.
And a lot of the problem probably is boards, the lack of training by the boards. So I guess that's a pretty big problem these days in nonprofit.
Yeah.
So,
and the misunderstanding of roles and responsibilities.
Right.
So the this series that we're about to embark upon is to address those very things, to address the lack of competency of individuals, the lack of understanding of just nonprofits themselves, as well as the executive committees that are forming nonprofits, and the awareness and just a lack of awareness of what is needed, on a nonprofit, as far as who are we bringing and why are we bringing this person on? What can they bring to the table? And do they know what their role and what their responsibility is?
I think that's a good thing, because most people join nonprofit boards without really understanding what the duties and responsibilities are. They don't really know what they're supposed to be doing. So I think a boot camp like this would be really good to help people understand exactly what their role should be.
Absolutely.
This is good.
To kind of switch it a little bit though, because you might sit there and say, as like just a layman or laywoman, like, so what? Board, okay, whatever. Like, we can just take the people that you have right now and just like have them just fire those people and get them board members. But the thing is, the amount of money and funds that you're dealing with is so great that why would you want, half of your registered nonprofits to lose their exemption status and lose their right to perform because they're providing services that have to do with the trillions of dollars in revenue. So this is support that's going to communities, educational arts projects, farming, the environment, just different things that we as citizens love to enjoy and realize. And I think, if people understood, and communities of board members understood the importance of their commitment and their role on these nonprofits and how important their role is as far as reporting and conveying the mission of these nonprofits that they're on, I think they would kind of take more ownership of, what their duties are and performing their duties on these nonprofits. So I think that's one of the startling statistics that I found was how much revenue is going to nonprofits and how much of that is government revenue, because that's another issue. Because if we're getting money from the government, then that adds another layer of compliance and standard following to our whole responsibilities, and so serve money to do more, rather than waste, because I think with mismanagement comes a lot of waste.
Yeah.
And your mission, your vision, it's off kilt. You're not able to perform the way and the plans that you had, the strategies that you had in mind to perform in a particular year or given period. You're not able to perform it because you're limited by your mismanagement of the resources that you're given. So, but make no mistake, there's a lot of resources that nonprofits are given.
So your boot camp is, the idea behind it is to present a series of meetings or seminars on how to, what the responsibilities of board members are and how they're supposed to act as board members?
It is that, but it's also going into the realm of how do we communicate? What's my title? What's your title? How should we oversee? What's a committee? And how do committees help us to perform better? Also looking at, how do we seek out and get training for ourselves, and what do we need training in, and why do we need training? Right. And it's also reaching out and aligning ourselves with other institutions and entities that can help assist us in meeting our responsibilities, meeting our duties. And it's also looking at what we're legally responsible for. I think that's a big issue that a lot of us don't realize, that we're bound, we're legally bound, and we hold responsibility that's beyond the nonprofits, that gets into the legal realm, knowing that and understanding that, having respect for that too. So just do a number of things. I think to me, the big shebang of the whole series would be the last series. I'm so excited about that because that series will touch on the ambassadorship and growth of new blood in nonprofit boards. So right now, you have an aging community of board members, and it's hard to communicate and to mentor younger folks to be and take the positions of these aging boards, because we don't know how to communicate what we're doing to the younger generation, because we don't know what our roles are in the first place. So how can we market what we don't know? So I think that's going to be the acumen of this whole thing, that last part. Further, and we've done our own research to determine, okay, what do board members feel that they stand in need of, along with what we just don't know. And a lot of the intricate areas is, how should I be performing as a treasurer? What does that mean? What does it mean to be the president? What does the secretary do? So just really understanding, what those roles are, as well as, how do we report? What does reporting mean? And compliance. What is compliance, and are we responsible for compliance? Knowing who you are as a nonprofit and what you need to be looking at. So all those to the detail. And then what types of nonprofits can you have, you know, and what nonprofits you might need to stay away from. And even some of the folks might be out there and they might be on a board, on a nonprofit, that really shouldn't be a nonprofit. So we'll help people to jump ship. They need to jump ship as well, because of the legal ramifications of, you know, the responsibilities when it comes to nonprofit. So,
that sounds like a really good idea.
I'm gonna go to my director, Amanda. So Amanda actually wanted us to give a little bit of information about ourselves and what makes us able to, if I can say it that way, discuss these topics. Like what gives us knowledge and understanding about what we're about to discuss with the community out there. And so I thought that was a relevant question by our director, so I said that I think one thing we should address is like, what's our background when it comes to boards? So what's your background when it comes to boards?
So my specialty is accounting, and I teach accounting at Chaminade. I've been on boards, nonprofit boards specifically, for almost 50 years now. So I've seen a whole lot of different boards. I've seen a lot of really good boards, and more importantly, probably, I've seen a lot of really bad boards. So I think I have a pretty good feel for what boards should be doing and what they should not be doing. Because it's important as a board member, so you guys out there, to not only know what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to do it, but how not to do it. That's almost more important. You know, avoiding mistakes, because, as Aaron said, there's legal liability, potential legal liability. So you really should be avoiding any kind of mistake, because it could affect you personally, which you definitely don't want as a board. But on the other hand, a board member can really shape the organization and really make a huge impact. You know, and the objective, the mission of all of these nonprofit organizations is to help the community. So you know, you can have a great chance to be helping a lot of people by doing it right, being a board member the correct way. So anyway, I bring a lot of
like a good steward. It's almost like being a good steward.
Well, that's what you are. You're a fiduciary. You know, you've got responsibilities to make sure that organization is sustainable. Lasts for a long time. So a lot of the boards I've been on, they have not done that. And you mentioned the statistic about nonprofits not making it. I've been through that experience as a board member, so I know, you know, that feeling, I guess. You know, nothing is worse than not being able to do your mission when you're trying to do good for people. You know? So anyway, as I said, I am considered an expert in the finances and financial portion of you know, nonprofits, but through my experience, I've also learned a lot about a lot of different areas within board management. So hopefully I can help you guys with this bootcamp.
I'm going to pick your brain a little bit, because one of our sessions, our later sessions, as we discussed earlier, is how to market and recruit the next generation of board members. Who stands out in your mind from your experience on boards that was just, I mean, a juggernaut of a director?
You know, it's interesting, and you'll get into this later, but too many boards are comprised of people who really know and understand the technical side of the mission of the nonprofit organization. So let's just take a feeding the homeless organization. Their board may be comprised of a lot of social workers, people who are in the business of, you know, feeding the homeless. But a board should not be comprised solely of those kind of technical experts. there should be a pretty wide range of expertise.
Yeah.
So you need a marketing person,
Yeah.
you need a finance person, you need a person who understands the homeless side of it.
Yeah.
So you need a wide range.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest mistake most nonprofit boards make, is
Yeah.
trying to staff the board with specialists who understand the field,
Yeah.
the mission that the nonprofit's trying to accomplish, but not necessarily understanding the business
That's right.
side of things.
Yeah.
And that's why I think you need a mixture of both of those.
Yeah. To keep, because at the end of the day, it is a business. You know, it's a nonprofit, but it's a business
It's a
as well.
business.
To keep it going.
That's right.
And to do the service, to do the mission, you need to be sustained. You need to be a growing concern.
Yeah.
If you're passionate, if your understanding, if your expertise is just in, you know, we want to do our mission, we just feel our mission, then you're going to falter, because you're not looking at, okay, how do we stay a going concern though? We got to do the mission, that's our thing, but how do we keep ourselves as a going
So
concern?
you mentioned a really good word, passion. Sometimes it's good to have board members, not sometimes, it's always good to have board members who aren't so passionate about the mission,
Yeah.
because you need a kind of a, you know, a neutral, objective viewpoint sometimes.
Yeah.
You need somebody who can step back
Yeah.
and look at the big picture.
Yeah.
You know, if you're too close and care too much,
Yeah.
then sometimes your passion kind of overwhelms and blocks the objectivity that you need.
Becomes your Achilles heel.
So in some of the boards, I obviously get chosen for boards because, well, not only am I charming good clothes, he's laughing.
This is debonair. This guy's debonair. He's
laughing.
debonair.
But, you know, it's beyond the knowledge of accounting and finance. I am able to objectively look at decisions, look at procedures and policies and that kind of a thing, and step back a little bit. And you need people like that on the board. So, you know, board members are feeling, geez, I'm not as passionate as the next guy about this organization. I think that's okay. Because you need some objectivity. You need somebody to step back and, okay, let me just take the passion out of it and look at it objectively. That's why accountants are so good at being on boards. We are very non-passionate people.
You need somebody that disagrees. I think that's what it is. You need somebody that will rock the boat a bit, you know, and that will challenge the board when they have certain passionate ideas. Like, can we really do that, guys, this year? And, you know, and I think that's
another
relevant.
great point. Too many boards are comprised of members who just go along with whatever everybody else says, or just goes along with whatever the executive director wants. And you're right, you need people who are willing to step up and say, you know, that just doesn't sound quite right. Let's take another look at that. Or, oh, I totally disagree with that. That's not going to help the organization in the long run. You need those kind of people. So that's another thing. You know, we don't want to have board members who always agree about everything. That's not a good thing, actually.
It's so what I found is, because I'm gonna go back to that, because I want to know who your juggernaut figures in your mind.
Okay, let me answer that.
Okay.
So, like I said, let's talk about young people. The best members of boards who are young people are not obviously necessarily the ones with the most experience. Too many times people of my generation feel like, oh, because I've experienced so much and I know so much about this field, you know, I'm the best person to be on the board. I know best. But sometimes, as I said, the objectivity, you need a fresh approach, a fresh insight into things, which is why young people are so important for the board. The other thing is, they're not afraid to ask questions that make them seem like they don't know much. Because they don't know much, and that's okay as long as they're smart enough to be able to understand it once they know it. But that's a good thing to have somebody on the board question things a lot. You know, so that's why an inquisitive but smart younger person with a passion for helping is probably the ideal board person these days.
That makes sense.
Yeah, not another older person, an old person like me, you know, who's gonna only be around 20 years.
Yeah.
But somebody who's gonna be there for another 30 years, 40 years, and be able to shape the board in the proper way, to be able to sustain the organization. That's ideal.
Do you think the current population of board members can learn that need and, I don't know how to say this, can change or modify their behavior in a way that they can be better mentors to these young people? Because they have a lot of knowledge that the young people can use.
It can be done. Obviously, it can be done. Mm-hmm. It's hard. Frankly, it's hard.
Yeah.
Somebody of my generation who have been on a board or worked in the field for many, many years, it's hard for them to put their ego aside and say, you know what, maybe the way I've been doing it for the past 30 years is not necessarily the best way. Times are changing. Maybe there's better ways of doing it. So one of the things that current board members need to do is exactly that. Realize that there may be other ways of doing things that are better. And maybe younger people, even though they don't have the experience that I have, they can teach me a lot. You know, technology is a great example of that, right?
Absolutely.
You know, Amanda over there, she knows more about technology than you and I put together.
That's right. That's right.
And we can learn a lot from her and her generation about those kinds of things. Same kind of thing for board membership and running a nonprofit organization. A lot of times younger people have ideas that are more current, up to date, and definitely older board members can learn a lot from these young people.
I think one of the things that you mentioned that it brings back to a saying that I hear from, because I listen to Earl Nightingale all the time. I love that guy. He's the podcast of the 50s that I love. But he has a story that he always often says in his speaking series that he once knew a jewelry owner who used to set his clock every morning to the factory's clock. And every morning there was a gentleman that would always go by his store because he had a big clock in his store that he set the time on, and he would look at that time and he would set his clock. And the jewelry store owner walked out one day and asked him, hey, you know what? I always see you looking in our window all the time. And he said, oh yeah, I'm just setting my clock to the clock there because I'm the one that sets the factory clock. And they've been setting the clock, so it's almost like, that's right. Cool. So it's challenging why we're doing or maintaining something a way that we're doing it. Is it even still relevant? Is it current? So I think having the young people there will stir that up, and they might even uncover things like, why are we spending money? Why are we doing this? What is this? What purpose is this? That went out of style in the 1970s, and we're still doing it. So it's that kind of thing going on. But I think that's really, really positive and relevant. So
Good example is this podcast. We had some ideas as older folks. But Amanda over there, our director, said, why are you doing it that way? Or why that? Why not this? And it's a fresh way of thinking, which is necessary.
That's right.
Almost everything.
Absolutely.
One of the first things is have confidence in your own beliefs and your own abilities. You, as a young person, know as much as the older board people, and even more in a lot of areas. Just because they're older doesn't mean they know more about everything than you do. So have the confidence to speak up and not assume you know less than them. And also is what's important for a young person in a board is not be afraid to be, I hate to say put in your place, but be told that you are wrong because of this. If there's, certain reasons and you are wrong, just don't take it personally and don't let it eat you up inside. It's, you're making a valuable contribution just by raising the question or the points a lot of times. So just be confident in yourself. You're as smart as we are. All we have over you is experience.
And maybe a little more white hair. I got some white hair too, so I got
okay, that's not good. Or at least you have hair. So.
A little bit. Everything that Richard is saying is relevant and real. The one thing that I found with young people is that what he's saying is be able to take criticism. I think one of the things that we haven't taught as, not necessarily teachers, but just, the older generation haven't really taught the younger generation on how to have that thick skin when it comes to their professional lives, so a lot of times these, this, younger generation, I love them. I love how you all are, you pride yourself on knowing who you are, knowing what you will take, what you won't, what you will tolerate, what you won't tolerate. But sometimes you can learn, so some things that you won't tolerate, or somebody that is, kind of very contentious to you or has a different personality, it pays to maybe sit back and say, you know what, let me just take it this time and listen, and maybe I can learn something, even if it's from a negative interaction. If you hold on, wait a minute, and go forward, you can tend to learn something and then be able to contribute even more in that organization versus I'm just gonna leave it alone. Because we need you all there, and if you all always leave it alone, we never get what we need to go to the future, and it's gonna be just there, and you're gonna have to fix it at some point, because we're not gonna be here to fix it. So I think having you all there to learn through the process and contribute, confidently is something that I think we can actually help you all build that type of confidence, and thick skin, if you will. So
I'm sure we'll get into this in the last session of the boot camp. Is all about that, right? Recruiting younger folks. But one of the important things, and this is for you older board members out there, is you have to be willing to accept criticism as well.
That's right.
And to listen to the new ideas from the younger generation, because a lot of times their ideas are better than the way we used to do things. Examples are Amazon, eBay. Who would have thought you can just go onto a computer and do all of your shopping, all of that kind of stuff? The way we do things is old-fashioned in a lot of cases. So be willing to accept that as older board members, and don't dismiss a younger person's ideas just because they're younger. Many times there are very good ideas.
Because there's nothing that's currently being done that must be done much better, far better than how it's being done today. It has to be done better. And the older generation, and I put myself in that classification, we kind of get stuck with nostalgia, like the way we used to do it. This is how I feel comfortable and confident in doing it, but it's not the best way to do it. There must, every generation has a responsibility to make that next business, that next process, that next organization better, much better than it ever was before. So I think that's one of the things that, the older generation can take away from it, need to kind of consider, because I think the older generation and the board members currently on boards are definitely significant, because they have so much knowledge. They have so much knowledge to share, but they need to be able to share it in a humble way and be able to rest in the fact that some of those ideas may be challenged, but that's an opportunity for them to learn and for the younger folks to learn in that challenge. So yeah, but I think that's good to kind of marry this together. Let's pivot. Let's turn heads of the turn the tide or the tables a bit, and let's talk about how do the mission and the vision of a nonprofit marry to the bylaws, and what are some of the reasons why we have bylaws for boards? So I'm talking about the mission. We have the mission and the vision of the nonprofit. How do we keep that mission and vision intact when it comes to a board of directors and their responsibility when it comes to bylaws? And we can just say laws for the lay man and woman, like the laws that govern how we as board of directors need to behave. How does, because I know you mentioned before, let's say you had a board that had that business expertise. They had that business expertise and they were very performance oriented when it came to how they ran that nonprofit. What do they need to be considering with the mission and vision? Do they need to be considering anything with the mission and vision?
I think the main responsibility of a board is to make sure that the mission of the organization is maintained. That's utmost and ultimately the main idea, the main thing. So even perhaps for nonprofit organizations, even as important as financial stability is the idea of maintaining mission. That's really important. So, you're right, I mentioned that it's sometimes good to have people who aren't really into the mission as much, but everybody needs to be cognizant of what the mission is and how the organization is following the mission. So even those impartial, non-technical outside people that are on the board, they must really understand at least, even if they don't believe in the mission with all their heart and all that, they should be at least aware of the mission enough where every decision that they make is based around the mission. The mission is really important. To me, that's the most important thing when setting up a nonprofit organization is getting the mission right.
So it's good to take your time to kind of think out what that mission should be.
Not good, I think it's absolutely necessary. I've been on too many boards that had a wishy-washy mission.
Yes.
Yeah. And even the people within the organization really didn't understand what the mission is. That's not, for a nonprofit organization, that's not the right way to do it. You need to have a very specific mission that can drive the organization and tell the people in the organization exactly what are we working for. What are we supposed to be doing?
On that point, I want to get dirty. I want to have a piece of this when we get dirty. I want to get dirty. Let's get dirty. So, what are examples of bad missions, bad nonprofits, and badly selected boards? What's and I want to get dirty. I want to get real dirty. So like what's an example of a bad mission, a bad nonprofit, and bad boards?
Okay, so the bad mission part is fairly easy. So I'm going to change things a little bit. I don't want to identify the organization necessarily, but a mission of an organization I once was on the board of was too broad. So the mission was to help the community of blank. So that was it. Their mission was to help a certain community. And it sounds like, well, that's a good mission. But in my mind and in being on that board, it really wasn't specific enough to help people understand. So exactly what do they do?
You
gotta answer the question. what do they do?
Yeah.
Well, they help this community, but how do they help the community? Specifically, what are they supposed to do? Many organizations make their missions really broad to be able to, you know, pivot here, pivot there, and do different things. But that tends to muddle the message, I guess. And you can't stay on focus unless you have a very focused mission, I believe. And there's probably, I would say, more than half the organizations out there now are probably like that. They're probably, their mission is way too broad, way too vague, so it doesn't guide them or give them any thing to go on as far as how to run their organization on a day-to-day basis. So, so a bad mission is one that's too vague and doesn't help you understand what does that organization do.
I tell you why I asked that, and just to let you all know, I'm going to have every series I'm going to get dirty. It's going to be a session where I just get dirty. But the reason I asked this is because I've experienced, being running an audit firm and having numerous clients and potential clients that are nonprofits. I've experienced a number of nonprofits that were established for the sole purpose of not paying taxes. The mission was written in a way by the individual who started the quote-unquote company that could do something that really underneath the surface was to make money that they didn't have to be taxed on, and to maybe get some donations and contributions here and there. And because of that, they ended up hand selecting yes women and men as their board. And so some of those boards don't even meet. They've never meet. Some of the individuals never seen each other. And to me, that's another community that I want to make sure that we tap into, to say, hey, get off those, because we're going to have one of our other experts come on that's all that he does. I mean, that's his expertise, that's his area, is legal responsibilities of boards. And he'll tell us really quickly, you are in a dangerous situation if you're on a board that is a IRS approved nonprofit that's not really performing the way that a nonprofit is intended to perform, and the reason that a nonprofit is given that grace and given that approval. So, and that's why I asked that question, because I've seen a lot, and most of those, not most, all of them that wanted to engage us as consultants or as accountants or as reviewers or whatever, we ended up turning heel, like, can't do that, because they didn't, and they knew what they were doing. I mean, and if you ask the questions, people will tell you what they're doing, without even knowing it. And it's just get it for profit. I mean, most of these businesses, they just need it for profit, but they wanted to not pay taxes. So
it's not a good reason to have a nonprofit.
Exactly. And that makes that exacerbates the fact of a poorly functioning board. And so to the older generation and to the younger generation as well, this will tell you that if I'm older and I've been on several boards, I may not have, the experience that you think I have. Because if I was hand selected by my brother-in-law or my sister that wanted to I just need somebody to name on the board, and I never did anything, then do I really have the experience that you think I have? Yeah, I've been doing it for 10, 20 years, but do I really have that experience? Exactly. So I think one of the things that, that draws out to me is the importance of being aware and of the reasons why you want to be a board member. I think that's something that we didn't really talk about, but in the last session, I do want to get into that too, because in promoting in advertising these positions, we need to give the population, the younger population of board members a reason why. Like, why is this a good service? Like, why you being a steward over this nonprofit and fulfilling that role as a director is a really good service? What does it do for not only just you, but what does it do for the community? Can you see that in the mission and things? So I think one of the things is having them have a really good understanding and ownership of what I really, because it's a volunteer. I mean, most of board members are volunteers, you know. So why are you doing it? You know, is it for accolades or is it for the service of it all? So it's like having the right mindset in doing it as well. So
let me give you an example of a good mission that is very focused. It's kind of self-serving because it's my daughter's.
Okay.
But she has an organization called Beer is for Everyone. So the mission of that organization is to educate the public and to encourage more inclusive participation by women, minorities, underserved populations in the beer industry. So the beer industry historically has been pretty much dominated by white men. They all have beards for some reason. But it's a very non-inclusive, non-diverse industry. So she's been working hard to try to get more people aware of the black-owned, minority-owned breweries, and how to get more of the minority, the women, the LGBTQ community involved in the beer industry, and if they are, to promote that, just to make the public aware that there are people out there like that, so that you too can become part of the beer industry. So it's a slowly growing part of the industry, I understand.
That's a really focused mission.
It's very focused.
It's really focused.
That's why I say the missions should be focused like that. And it's helpful because she has been considering, hey Dad, I'm gonna do this and this. And I say, hey, but is that really your mission? Is that what your mission statement says? Do you really want to do that? She says, I guess so.
Because and it keeps the people focused.
It keeps them focused, laser focused on what they should be doing. That's what a good mission is all about. So,
what do you say to boards that their nonprofit is really well? It's an awesome nonprofit. They're doing a good service, but their mission doesn't match. What would you tell those boards? If their mission doesn't match the good service that, and let's say that it just morphed into this. They've been in existence for a decade or two, and it morphed into something. What would you tell them?
Look behind your back, because the IRS will be chasing you. If a nonprofit organization starts to stray from its mission too much, they could lose their nonprofit status. So they got to be really careful. So they either have to stick with the mission, or it's okay to change the mission if you change focus of the organization. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as you don't keep doing it. But if you have slowly been pivoting to a different mission, then change the mission statement. So in the Form 990, one of the first things you have to indicate is what the mission of the organization is. So that can be changed. So whatever, always have the mission of the organization aligned with what you're actually doing. So,
because the pragmatic thing, when we have these boards that will be morphing, that will be integrating this new blood, this fresh blood. The fresh blood's going to look at a lot of the missions, and they're going to say, "Hey guys, like walkathons. I mean, let's just use that example. Walkathons. We can't gather like that anymore. And who does walkathons like this? Like we do like more social media blasts. The challenges that they do, the ice. What is that? What was it?
Ice bucket challenge.
Ice bucket challenge. So they might see like, why are we doing it this way? This is like, you know, my grandmother told me about this way to do it. And so they're going to challenge the programs that are in these nonprofits that are part of their mission. So I think there needs to be, and that's probably going to be part of one of our sessions, is how do we go about addressing and revising missions, and even on top of that, that might change the rules that govern us as board members.
Yes.
So how do we go about changing the bylaws, you know?
Absolutely.
So I think that's going to, because that's going to be totally something that comes up, especially, and it's not just with the smaller nonprofits, but it's going to be big nonprofits too that get the fresh blood and they look at things and say, wait a minute, why are we doing this? You know, that doesn't even exist anymore.
Right.
So yeah.
Another thing about mission, I don't know if we're kind of bleeding into the future, you know, sessions.
It's okay, we're introducing anything, so it's all good, yeah.
The thing about mission is, there are not very many nonprofit organizations that are able to expand their mission without sacrificing some of what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
You know, you're spreading your resources too
Yeah.
thin. So that's why your mission has to be focused so that you can concentrate on what you do best and spend most of your resources doing that.
Yeah.
Once you start to stray, your
Yeah.
resources are going to be spread too
That's
thin.
right. That's right.
And that's another reason a lot of nonprofits fail, is because they try to do too much.
Yeah.
So you can't really do that. You need to have that laser focus on your mission.
And that gets into the relationship between management and the board.
Yes.
Because if there is, it's almost like, and I'm gonna show my ignorance when it comes to politics, but it's almost like having like your president and your Senate and your Congress, like, okay, the president wants to do this, but then wait a minute, you have to get that past the Congress and the Senate. So if you don't have a two-body, you know, challenge, or challenge is not the right word, holding each other accountable. So you don't have any accountability there.
Checks and balances.
Checks and balances, that's better. Checks and balances. If you don't have any checks and balances, you'll never get to a point where you have and you maintain that laser focus. Because if I'm the executive director and I handpick the board, you know, and I'm the president, let's say I'm the president, and I handpick the board, I'm running a nonprofit, I can do pretty much what I want to do. Without, I mean, yeah, we wrote the mission and everything, but I'm gonna sell on Amazon, I'm gonna go out around here and ask for donations, you know, next to the guy marching the dimes. I'm gonna go over here when Goodwill collects their furniture, I'm gonna collect the furniture in my truck. You know, I can do a lot of things, but it's like, who is checking me? Who is, you know, holding me accountable? And I think that's one of the reasons why this training is also important, because it needs to be an awareness of, no, everybody is not, I shouldn't say front, that's not the word, I'm not trying to like get people enemies, but there's no reason why one person or one entity or unit should not be able to professionally challenge or address an issue that just does not make sense to them.
No, it should not be. They should.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's their responsibility.
That's their role.
And that's something that, from not every experience, but a lot of the experiences that I've had, there's none of that. There's no, you know, devil's advocate, if you will, in these institutions, and a lot of the institutions fail because there's nobody. All they needed was one person to just ruffle, you know, the waves, like create the waves, and not fire or not let go that board member or, you know, push them out, but listen and just consider what they said, and maybe try to address it, and they might still be here, but they had none of that. So I think having those checks and balances is definitely relevant. So yeah. Now, this is really good. I like this. Good stuff. Okay, so
Aaron.
Can we dig up some more dirt? This last piece, I want to dig up some more dirt. But I want to dig it up because I want us to think about, and I want the audience to think about, how might we source the funds we need to run our nonprofit, because there are many different ways, you know, and I think I call it digging up the dirt, is because a lot of times people are after the money, you know, where we want the money just because we want the money. We want to, you know, we hear there's a nonprofit here, there's a nonprofit here. We look at Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Jordan's Foundation, Oprah's Foundation, you know, Buffett has, you know, we look at all these different foundations and we say, wow, they're doing well, and we just want, and they're not paying taxes. That's what we kind of think about. I don't think about it, you don't think about it, because we're, you know, we're under the code of conduct, but there are people out there that think about it, and it's about that retaining money. But let's talk about how do people get money? Like where are all these sources coming from? And you know, statistically, the largest 3 sources of funding are going to come from program revenue, which we'll get into later, and it's going to come from state and local governments, federal governments, and individuals. Those are the largest 3 sources of revenue that any nonprofit in the U.S. is going to get funds from. So what should I think about, and what should board members think about when they are in that realm and in that area? We need to bring in money. Where should they look? Should they look to the federal and state government? Should they look to the nonprofits, individuals, or how?
So you're right. A lot of it has to do with the mission of the nonprofit and what they're supposed to be doing. And depending on what the nonprofit does, that kind of, I don't want to say forces, but kind of dictates what's the best source of funding.
Okay.
So, for example, if it's a social community benefit type of thing, then a lot of times, you know, like feeding the homeless and those kinds of things, a lot of times the funding for that, the best source of funding for that is grants.
Okay.
So, you know, government grants, you know, city and county, but there's also like the, you know, the foundations around town that also, like the Weinberg Foundation, for example, that give money to social causes. You mentioned the Bill, Melinda. Is it still Bill and Melinda, by the way?
You know what, that's a good question. I think it is. I honestly think it is. I think it is.
I hate to split that up. But anyway, so they also give, you know, contributions, grants to organizations. So if you're one of those social welfare organizations, then that's probably your best source, is to go after grants. Smaller organizations, nonprofit organizations, most of the funding comes from individual donations. So for people like you and I donating money to them, and if you're a type of organization that probably would have a hard time, because grants are sometimes hard to get. There's so many different stipulations and restrictions on who can apply for those grants that sometimes it's difficult. But if you're a small organization that really don't fit any of those criteria for applying for grants, then, you know, going after public contributions is probably the only realistic way of doing that. You mentioned the third one, program revenues. So certain kinds of nonprofits have programs where they actually charge for services. So those kind of organizations, basically, even though they can get public donations, they can get grants, for example, it's really difficult to go beyond what they charge per program. You know. So one of the examples, I just worked with Big Brothers Big Sisters. And you know, a lot of their funding comes from the charges that they charge for services that they render. So hooking up the Big Brothers and the Little Brothers together, you know, Big Sisters and Little Sisters, there's a fee associated with that. Many times they are able to get grants to fund that. The majority of their revenues come from providing the service. And it's okay, by the way, to charge more than cost for programs, as long as you know, the excess goes toward helping to administer those programs. So there's nothing wrong. Just because you're a nonprofit doesn't mean you can't, quote unquote, make money from something. It's just that it, you know, fund administrative costs, etc. with that. Another way to do raising funds, and you got to be really careful about this one, and this will be talked about in another session, is by selling merchandise. A lot of organizations sell things to raise money.
Yes.
T-shirts, huli chicken, Zippy's chili, you know, but you got to be really careful, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure, in another session. You may be subject to paying taxes if you sell merchandise or provide services. It's a really difficult, it's a really complex system. So we'll leave that for another session. But that's another way. Some organizations, that's the way they raise the majority of their funding. And again, you got to be really careful about that. You know, so let's say you're the YPO Little League, and they raise most of their funding. It comes from donations from the parents whose kids are in the program, and from selling huli chicken, you know, sweet Molokai sweet bread, or not sweet bread, Molokai bread, you know, those kinds of things. But they have to be very careful about how they do that to avoid having to pay tax on that. But that's another source of funding.
And I think to that point, it also will depend for our audience. It'll depend on what state you're in as well. Because I know for the state of Hawaii, where we are, there are some programs, some sources of revenue where we have to not only get the IRS's approval, but we have to get the state's approval in order to avoid the GET, which is the general excise tax for us. So I think for every state, you have to be careful with that as well.
It's different.
And
different countries as well. If we have any First Nations people out there in Canada, you know, they have different rules for nonprofits there as well.
Absolutely.
So that's something that you have to be real careful about. We'll talk a little bit about that in the finance area later.
That makes sense. So let's pivot a bit. So I want to change gears and just to wrap us up, talk about the oversight. Like why are we here? Like, why is our presence in a nonprofit so important? So what does oversight and governance mean? You know, what is that?
You know, that's a pet peeve of mine. A lot of nonprofit boards feel like their responsibility is to act like an advisory committee to the executive director and to management. That is not the role of the board of directors. It's not an advisory group. It's a governing. So the responsibility of the board is not just to give advice, it's to actually approve of the procedures and policies that govern the organization. So there's a lot more involved than just giving advice. It's actually, you are the ones who are overall running the organization. So you have the responsibility of running the organization. You know, too many boards just rely totally on their executive director, for example, and give them free rein. But then you're not doing you mentioned the word oversight. That's one of the responsibilities of the board, is to watch over the management of the organization to make sure they are doing things the way they're supposed to be doing it and what they're supposed to be doing as approved by the board. So I've seen, and I've been a part of too many boards where the board doesn't really give oversight and review what the executive director and the administration are doing. They're just giving advice occasionally. I quit those kinds of boards. I don't stay on those very long. But that's a big misconception. As board members, you are responsible for the board's, for the organization's sustainability, not the executive director. You hire the executive director. You have the ability to fire the executive director,
And see, I think that's a very big and huge point, because the executive director tends to hire staff, you know, the managers, the accounting manager, payable manager, whatever, inventory manager, and then they hire, you know, the staff and the interns and things of that nature. But who's the boss of the president? Who's the boss of that executive? And it's supposed to be the board of directors.
The board, yes.
You know, and so the review process is something that they actually have to do. You have to. The review is not giving advice. It's something that you're responsible for doing.
Yes.
And knowing what that is, I think is a great deal of importance to all the boards.
You mentioned the word boss. I mean, that's exactly it. The board is the boss of the president or executive director of the organization.
Yeah.
So there should be, and we'll get into this later, legal responsibilities of the board. But there's got to be annual reviews of the executive director. You know, if the executive director is not doing things quite right, it's the board's responsibility to tell them, no, that's not according to our policies. You're supposed to be doing it this way. You know, the board not only has the right to do that, they have to do that.
Let's pivot for a minute, because on this topic, I think we can make it very plain to the participants that are watching this. Let's flip it to a Fortune 500 for-profit board of directors. Now, you know, like those CEOs and executives that get hired, it's like a basketball contract. Like, we got you for 2 years, such and such. You know, what does it mean for them when it comes to reviewing that CEO for the Fortune 500 company?
So I've also been part of boards of for-profit organizations. There, the review criteria and the review process is really stringent. I mean, it's almost like the CEO has to start all over like a job application, and he or she gets everything scrutinized that they've done. And the boards are really serious for for-profit organizations about making sure that the CEO is doing what the board thinks they should be doing. And you raise a good point. It's the board that hires the CEO, not the other way around. The board hires the CEO. They are responsible for the performance of the CEO. So similar thing to nonprofit organizations. The board of a nonprofit organization should be closely monitoring and scrutinizing the performance of the executive director. And you mentioned about the employment contract. I personally think, and most nonprofits don't have this, every executive director should have some kind of a contract with a limited term. You know, and there's nonprofits out there, executive director has been there 40 years, for example. You know? Nothing wrong with that, as long as the board is reviewing them periodically and saying, okay, you're doing a good job, you can be hired for another 5-year term or something like that. You know?
Ultimately, the reason I bring that up, for-profit, nonprofit board executives, is because the performance for a for-profit executive is very clear. Listen, our bottom line needs to be this at the end of this year, and next year needs to be this. If you don't hit those targets, you're out of there. So it's performance orientated, and it should not. There's no reason why a nonprofit executive shouldn't have not maybe a for-profit performance rater, but some type of rating scale that says these are the targets that we're giving you to hit. If you don't hit them, you know, you're out of there. We got to get a board that would allow our nonprofit to, you know, function at its optimal level, and you're not doing that. So I think having something, like you said, having some type of contract, limited amount of time, and having some targets, like setting some targets.
I think that's absolutely so. By the way, one of the biggest differences between a for-profit and nonprofit board is the board also has to report to somebody. They have to report to the shareholders. The shareholders are actually the boss of the board. And the board is the boss of the president or CEO of the company. Nonprofit organizations don't have that additional layer. The shareholders, So, which is why the governance of a nonprofit organization is sometimes lax.
Yes.
Because there's nobody that is overseeing the board.
Yeah.
The board is the top
Just
level.
doing this thing, and
So there's nobody watching over them.
Yeah.
But
so that's that you raise a really good point. So you really have to be very careful about who it is that's selected to be on a board.
yes.
Now this brings up another point too. If the executive should not be, in my opinion, the person that is creating the nonprofit, has the idea. If the person that has the vision and passion, they can do it, but I don't think it's wise to make them the CEO. I think they might be, some functional capacity as a mission driver or what have you, but I've seen situations where the creator was the CEO, and like I said, cherry picked the board to cater to what they wanted to do as a CEO. So they really were the board and the CEO.
Yeah,
honestly, that's what they were.
Right.
And so, but having a board, I don't see anything wrong with them selecting members to help them select additional members of a board so that they then can select an appropriate CEO. I feel that's more appropriate than that one person that has the vision, and they might have a good vision, good passion, and all that stuff, but I think they're too close to it. That's my opinion.
Depending on the size, though, like I mentioned, my daughter's nonprofit organization. Many nonprofit organizations are an organization of one.
Yeah.
And you can't avoid that, right?
Yeah.
But I like the idea of having, rather than the executive director choosing people to be on the board, to have a committee, a subcommittee of the board. And I think in a later session we'll talk about subcommittees and committees. Have a committee of board members, not the entire board, maybe 3 people.
Yeah.
Have a committee, they select the next round of board members, or they approve of the renewal of board members' contracts. And the executive director doesn't have any official say in the selection of the board people. Which raises another point, by the way. Board members should also have a term limit.
I was just going to say that because you mentioned that with the executives, but definitely with the board, because you want.
Well.
So, to the audience, our background, Richard and I's background is in, we're CPAs by trade. So one of the things that we know about, I'm sure some of you know about this too, is Sarbanes-Oxley. Sarbanes-Oxley was created because of, to those of you who are older, Enron, WorldCom, the debacle behind that. But one of the features of Sarbanes-Oxley, one of the rules was that a partner of a audit firm could not head an audit for longer than 5 years, I believe it was. So they had to rotate. So having board members with limited time would keep that same independence and integrity level high when it comes to their functionality around the purpose of this. So that might kind of make some of your hearts feel sad because you love this organization, want to be a board member, but just think about it this way. That nonprofit that you believe so much in is going to have fresh perspective, fresh outlook, and you can always rotate back on. But it's good to have a clean set of eyes, clean set of actions, clean set of hands on that organization to mold it and to shape it to be better in the future. So
some states are actually passing laws requiring rotation of board members. So a board member can't be, let's say, on the board for more than 5 years. They have to rotate off, and the board member has to go on. So even if it's not the law in the state you operate in, that's just good business practice anyway. To rotate board members, and it's you do lose some of the knowledge, of the board members who have been there, but as Aaron said, it leads to fresh ideas, that type of thing, which is also very good. So I highly encourage that if that is feasible in your organization, to do that, to rotate the boards.
The other point is that helps with the checks and balances that
Yes.
you mentioned we don't have. We
Yes.
don't have stockholders and shareholders to hold us board members accountable.
Yeah.
So this is just another mitigating, check that we can institute to say, you know what, we are, operating with integrity, we're operating with objectivity, and we're performing diligently, when we, fulfill our service as servants and as board members.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That helps also with fundraising as well. People want to give money to organizations they feel like are being managed properly.
Yeah.
And that's one of the keys, I think,
Yeah.
for proper management is to do some rotation of the board members.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't hurt even to have that, well, not hurt, we should have that formally documented,
Yes.
terms of the boards, the terms of the executives,
Yes.
the process that we go through
Should be in
to
the
select,
bylaws,
it
right?
should be in the bylaws,
Right.
so if somebody reviews and wants, because big donors want more. They like if I'm a multi-million-dollar family per se, let's say, and I'm looking to give to this nonprofit university, I'm looking to give to this hospital, I'm going to send my lawyers, my accountants, and say, let's pull their books, let's see what they're working with.
How are they being managed?
Yeah, because and that's one of the things that I comment a lot of times. And Bill and Melinda, if y'all are watching this, please, this is disclaimer. This is just something that I say. But I tell them that the reason why Warren Buffett is donating all of his funds, most of them, I should say, when he passes, to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, because they're a strong, effective, performing nonprofit. But then you think about it, why are they performing so well? But look at their standards, look at their regulations, look at their rules that they implemented when it comes to board transition, when it comes to executive, acquisition. They have a very healthy performance track record. So I would want to give my money to them. That's why you see him giving it to them, because it's not because he's their friend, it's because they're a very healthy, performing nonprofit. So
Does that tie into the duties of care and such?
Yeah.
Duties
Is
of
that
care,
what you want?
it absolutely does.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely does.
Yeah.
So as you all just heard, our director, she mentioned, does that tie into the duties of care? And that is absolutely what it ties into. I mean, if you're performing as a board of directors, so not just the individual board now, it's like the board of directors, how are we performing with care? How are we fulfilling our duty to be and to perform with integrity, to perform with independence? And part of this is what type of rules and laws and processes do we have in place to make sure that we are performing, and that's part of our duty of care. So I think we actually are covering that with this.
So this series, this bootcamp series, sounds like a good start.
Yes.
But there's just so much more information out there that I think this series could go on for years.
Yeah.
Because there's so much stuff to give advice to you guys about.
And it's always changing. It's always
Yeah.
changing. We mentioned about having, fresh blood come in and look at these nonprofits. And it's not if, it's they're going to find different things that just should not be there. They need to be changed. Because the nonprofits that have been in existence, and we can mention names, I don't want to put them out there, that are national nonprofits, they have practices, they have standards, they have things that they've been doing that they should not be doing anymore. It's not feasible. That we don't have the landscape, the economy, and we're in, 2021, we're in the last 3 months of 2021. It's about to be 2022, and some of the practices that are being maintained to raise funds, to source revenue, to affect the community, are from like the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. So they're not.
You make it sound like that's so long ago.
Yeah.
For me, that was
It's
just
nostalgia.
yesterday,
It's
you know?
nostalgia.
Jeez.
Yes. So, but it's having the ability to look at the landscape, look at your environment. Are we fulfilling our mission? Are we hitting the number of individuals? Are we impacting the societies that we want to impact? And to the extent to the level we want to impact. And some of these things that we're doing, we're not. We're limiting ourselves. So yeah, that's the fluidness of these series. These series, I think we're gonna, probably institute this thing on an annual basis because things just change so rapidly and they change for the better. And I think we'll be able to offer, some fresh ideas and some new challenging points for the audience as well as ourselves to take back to our clientele and to the folks that we serve. So.